pineapple, shoes. Today we are talking about swearing. In Better Angels of Our Nature, Steven Pinker says that swearing is a sign of a civilized society. Says the man drinking wine out of a whiskey glass. You're not going to be hung for comparing a member of the royal family to the hindquarters of a donkey. We have progressed beyond that. There is no doubt that there is an offensive side to the English language, but you are free to use it as you please. The question is, when should it be used and when should it be avoided? Now, if you're writing a picture book for 3-year-olds, it's probably best that the talking squirrel doesn't have speech bubbles filled with expletives. So let's focus on fiction for adults. Now, the reason this subject is on my mind is because I've been working on the second draft of a screenplay that I've written, and there is quite a lot of effing and a little bit of jeffing in it. And the last novel I wrote had swearing in it too. It is occasional and mostly in dialogue, but when I was editing the final draft of that book, I paused for thought when I got to the point where the 14-year-old children in that book swore. Now, to justify the swearing of these 14-year-olds, I'm going to drag out 2 very important words: realism and context. 14-year-olds swear. You might not hear them doing it, and not all of them do it, but most, when amongst their peers, use bad language all the time. I know this because I used to be one. Now, I know that sounds hard to believe, but it's true. And I had a beard then too. I've had this beard since I was 4 years old. And me and my friends not only knew all of the words, but we were creative with it. In fact, I remember there was a computer game reviewer called Stuart Campbell who used some pretty good swear word enriched sentences in his reviews, which we would adopt and use as our own and deploy at every given opportunity. I can still remember one of those slurs with fondness. One of us would see each other in the playground and say hello, and he would say, "Hello, you steaming pile of I piss in your shoes." We used to say that to each other in the school playground, and your kids are probably saying it too if you have kids, or maybe you're a 14-year-old kid and you're doing it. I know you're doing it, don't lie about it. The point is, kids swear, and adults swear. People swear. It's a part of the thing that we do as humans. We use our vocabulary, and sometimes we say noises in such a way that people are offended. You can avoid it in your writing, maybe you should. But sometimes avoiding it takes away from the realism of what you're writing. As I'm currently writing horror, I'll use horror as an example. Let's say we have a 14-year-old boy called Billy. And Billy has just witnessed the violent death of a parent. Is he likely to mutter the word, "gosh," under his breath, or something more visceral? The word "gosh" would immediately destroy the believability in the scene. However, if you are writing a scene where Billy is enjoying a particularly good ice cream, it would be unnecessary for him to describe it as being f***ing delicious. So here's my dilemma, and one that got me onto thinking about this in the first place. When is it okay to swear in prose outside of dialogue? My thoughts on this are straightforward. If you take a swear word out, no one is going to notice that it isn't there. And so all of them should be eliminated. Whether or not swearing is okay in a civilized society, there is no doubt that some people find it abhorrent. Fly! There was a fly. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a fly. So take it out. Take out the swear. You don't need it. People will happily read the murder scenes in your book and not flinch. But as soon as they come across an F word in a descriptive passage, a big bell will ring in their head. Even if that ringing stops pretty quickly, it is still jarring enough to take them out of the scene. So why have I left a few in? Sometimes your descriptive prose will reflect the mood of whichever character is in that scene. And that's okay, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. But sometimes it helps to clarify the mood, or in enhance the experience of the reader of what the mood of that character is. So, to give an example, you have a scene that goes, Graham, who we met in the last episode, I'm going to read off the page for this one. Graham stood on the side of the road, looking at his smashed-up car. The other driver, some drunk moron, was still sat in his driver's seat, bleeding from the ears. Terry had two options. Call a taxi and make it to the wedding on time, or help this stupid fucking drunk. Alright, so that's not a great example, but hopefully it illustrates that in reading the descriptive passage, we're sort of getting an insight into his thoughts and his feelings towards the man who has crashed and caused him to be late for his wedding. Sometimes the prose reflects the thoughts, and sometimes you're thinking cuss words. It's interesting to me that there are no age guidelines on books. There's no there's no PG books or 18 books. It's just books. Some are colourful, some are not. That's how we differentiate between children's books and adults' books, sort of. Not like in films or television, so it's up to the responsibility of the author to... Just pausing for the aeroplane that's going over. It's up to the responsibility of the author to be sensible with the language that they're using. But if you're buying a horror book and you're expecting scares and blood and then you shouldn't be surprised if there's a few naughty words in there, is my opinion. Again, I don't think Harry Potter should be calling Hermione a little bitch. There's going to be a lot of bleeping in this episode. But we're not talking about sex and violence, we're talking about language. And you might lose some readers because you're using vulgar words, but remember, that just makes you more civilized than them. They say that swearing is a sign of a limited vocabulary. I would argue that if you stopped swearing, you'd be lessening your vocabulary by at least 5 words. In fact, people who don't swear, by the very virtue of not swearing, have a lesser vocabulary. They have less words at their disposal, and really f***ing fun words as well. But don't swear for the sake of it. The novelty wears off pretty quickly for the reader. So long as your portrayal of life is true, you shouldn't have to think too hard about whether or not any particular word is necessary. It should just come. It either feels real or it feels like you're swearing because you think it's cool. Swearing isn't cool. Now, having said all of that, I recently learned that the child never swears in his Jack Reacher books. I've been reading them in order, and I'm up to, I think, book 20 now. And I have to admit, I didn't even notice that there wasn't any swearing in them. And they're pretty violent books, and they're very adult in nature. There's sexy scenes in it, but there's no swearing. I hadn't noticed that. So maybe there is something to be said for that. As Lee Child said, he's never received a letter of complaints because there wasn't enough swearing in his books. So maybe I'm rethinking my thing as I'm extolling on the virtues of swearing in prose and that it's okay to do. And maybe after all, swearing is completely unnecessary and not needed in any kind of fiction. And maybe if it becomes a hurdle for any reader, and readers that like swearing aren't going to notice that they're not there anyway, maybe just don't put any swears in your books. Personally, I think it's really funny when the 14-year-old girl in my book calls the guy in the shop a for not selling her tobacco. So, in conclusion, swear if you want, it's up to you. It's a free world. There are far greater things to worry about than whether or not a rogue fuck is going to upset a stranger. Also, in conclusion, there is no good reason whatsoever to swear in your writing. So in conclusion again, this video has been of no help whatsoever, and you would have been just as well off had you never watched it in the first place. Subscribe for more time-wasting content. Oh, and if you have a mailing list, why not pop a link to this video on my channel at the bottom of your next newsletter. It won't cost you anything, and let me know if you do, and I'll be sure to mention your kindness in a future video.